If you're worried artificial intelligence is about to kill us all or take all our jobs, relax. Historically, whenever humanity invents a new machine, we assume it will do one of those two things, and so far, we're still here. Admittedly, most previous technologies weren't able to actively plot against us. Don't Panic, a guide to artificial intelligence. Now, a moment ago I joked that none of our previous inventions, not even nuclear weapons, have managed to wipe us out yet, but also that those technologies weren't capable of actively plotting against us. That's true, but it's also worth noting that neither is today's artificial intelligence. Current AI does not think, does not scheme, and certainly isn't secretly planning a robot uprising. In fact, artificial intelligence has been around a lot longer than ChatGPT and the other large language models that dominate the headlines today. In this episode, we'll focus on the near-term reality of AI, what it can actually do, what risks it may pose, and how it may reshape our lives and economy in the decades ahead. The short version is this: today's AI is neither magic nor a menace, but a powerful new tool whose real effects are far more interesting than either the hype or the panic. So today, we'll set the hype aside and dig into the details that often get skipped in more sensationalist discussions. We discussed truly super intelligent machines in other episodes. In fact, I was in the middle of writing one about whether AI might be a great filter in the Fermi paradox when I decided to pause and take this more near-term look first. And those scenarios are fascinating and important, but they're also problems that future generations, who understand these systems far better than we do, will probably be in a better position to tackle. For now, we got plenty of our own challenges to deal with, and AI might help solve some of them, while creating a few new ones along the way too, such as the nature of life, the universe, and everything involving technology. I am a techno-optimist by and large, an even bigger optimist about humanity, not because I'm unaware of all faults or the dangers of AI. Both are real and numerous, and we're not going to gloss over those today. Our conclusion won't be to relax and let our guard down, or to assume AI is mostly harmless, but in this Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence, we'll also see why now isn't the time for panic either. This is going to be an in-depth discussion, so grab a drink and a snack, like and subscribe to the show, and feel free to continue the discussion in the comments below, but politely. At the moment, AI is not as smart as a human being, and it certainly isn't capable of building itself or taking over the world. If that ever does become a possibility, we might want to remember the old engineering rule: keep it simple, stupid. Or our version of it here on SFIA: keep it simple, keep it dumb, otherwise you might end up under Skynet's thumb. Artificial intelligence is having a cultural moment. Over the last few years, it has leapt from research labs and industry tools into the public spotlight, largely thanks to chatbots, image generators, and other systems that suddenly made machine intelligence visible to everyday users. For many people, this was their first real encounter with AI, and the reaction has ranged from amazement to anxiety. For some of us who grew up on science fiction, and particularly on Isaac Asimov's famous 3 laws of robotics, it feels a little less shocking. In my own case, that connection is especially literal. My parents were both part of early computer scene in the 1970s, even named me after Isaac Asimov. But AI didn't suddenly appear in the 2020s. There were already experimental chatbots decades ago. When I was an undergraduate in the late 1990s, I remember interacting with systems like Alice, the Artificial Linguistic Internet Computer Entity, and Jabberwocky, some of the earliest conversational AI programs. They were crude by modern standards, but they showed that machines could already imitate conversation in interesting ways. And those chatbots were really just the visible tip of a much larger field, an interesting toy. While the actual use of AI was already well underway, artificial intelligence has been quietly shaping the modern world for decades. Those early chatbots were primitive, of course, but so were the early online forums where people encountered them. Yet those communities mattered more than we sometimes remember. For the first time, scientists, engineers, and science fiction fans could regularly exchange ideas outside of conferences or conventions, improving naive ideas about AI from sci-fi, and concepts like the technological singularity began moving from fiction into serious discussion. Meanwhile, long before anyone was asking a chatbot to write essays or generate images, machine learning systems were already helping run global logistic networks, guiding aircraft autopilots, managing financial markets, filtering spam, recommending music and movies, and helping scientists analyze enormous datasets. AI systems help identify tumors in medical scans, optimize shipping routes across continents, and even assist in designing new materials and medicines. In many ways, the real change last few years has simply been that smaller companies and ordinary individuals now have access to useful AI tools themselves, not just governments, mega corporations, and research institutes. In other words, artificial intelligence did not arrive overnight. It's been growing steadily, expanding in more fields and becoming more capable year after year. What changed recently wasn't the existence of AI, but its visibility. Suddenly, millions of people could interact with it directly, and that made the technology feel new, mysterious, and sometimes a little unsettling. And their reaction is nothing new either. Every major technology shift tends to trigger the same cycle of excitement and alarm. It's probably a healthy process too, even if unhealthy at times. Many of us lived through video game consoles arriving, home PCs, the internet, texting, and smartphones, and now AI integration into a lot of our apps. When the steam engine appeared, people worried machines would eliminate all human labor. When computers arrived, some predicted the end of work itself. I imagine someone complained about using an ox to pull a plow too, and that complaint probably has some valid points. Yet each time, while that transition was often disruptive and often painful, civilization adapted, and new technologies ultimately expanded what humanity could do rather than simply replacing us. Artificial intelligence is beyond a doubt a powerful tool and may prove to be an even larger transformation than those earlier innovations. That does not mean it's the end of the story for human civilization. So, in this episode, we're going to step back from the headlines and the hype and take a calmer look at artificial intelligence. We'll talk about what AI actually is, with a minimum of techno-speak, and explain the jargon along with how it works. We'll also ask why so many people are worried about it, even tech-savvy types, and what the future might realistically look like as these systems become more capable. We'll try to look at both sides of the usage issue and neutrally look at the concerns raised. Though it's only fair to establish my own biases from the outset, I am cautiously optimistic on AI. Fundamentally, while AI may change the world in profound ways, understanding it starts with something much simpler. Don't panic. What we actually mean by AI. Before we can talk about whether artificial intelligence is dangerous, transformative, overhyped, or underappreciated, we should probably start with a very simple question. What do we actually mean when we say AI? Because right now, if you ask the average person about artificial intelligence, they likely think about chatbots, systems like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or image generators that can create art, write text, or answer questions. And those are impressive tools, for certain uses anyway. For instance, I love them for cleaning up my notes or helping me prep outlines or edit, but I wouldn't rely on them for professional grade writing. That could be bias. Writing is my favorite part of my job, but I'd say they tend to produce what I call pretty decent results, often good enough to be useful, but rarely exceptional. They can be surprisingly helpful one moment and very wrong the next, but they still have plenty of applications that generally improve quality of life for the average person. They're also just one branch of a much larger and much older field. Most of the AI quietly running the modern world doesn't look anything like a chatbot and have different strengths and limitations. AI helps route aircraft and manage autopilot systems. It optimizes shipping networks that move millions of packages every day. It runs recommendation systems that suggest what movie you might want to watch tonight, or what YouTube video. It helps scientists search through the enormous datasets for patterns that humans would struggle to find. It filters spam for your email and detects fraud in financial transactions. Now, to be fair, it also helps people generate a lot more spam emails and engage in fraud that's much more sophisticated than the form letters asking you to help out a Nigerian prince. In medicine, AI systems already assist doctors by flagging potential tumors in medical scans. In manufacturing, machine vision systems inspect products faster and more consistently than human eyes can. In logistics, AI helps determine the most efficient routes for trucks, ships, and airplanes moving goods around the globe. It will almost certainly begin to outperform doctors in most diagnostic roles in the next couple of years, a point we will return to. Most of these systems are not flashy. They don't hold conversations, write poetry, or generate pictures of cats wearing astronaut suits. They just quietly make complicated systems work better, and that's an important point to keep in mind as we talk about AI in the coming years. Artificial intelligence is not a single technology. It's a broad category of tools and approaches for getting machines to perform tasks that normally require human reasoning or pattern recognition. To understand where AI might go in the future, helps think about three broad ways intelligence can be created. The first is engineered intelligence. This is the classic approach from early artificial intelligence research, where a program was explicitly defined rules and logic. These systems do not learn on their own. Instead, they operate according to structures humans designed. Expert systems are a classic example. These programs contain large sets of rules written by human specialists. They can diagnose mechanical problems, assist with legal reasoning, or help interpret complex technical data. They are often extremely powerful in narrow fields, but they rely heavily on human expertise to build and maintain. The second approach is learning intelligence. Instead of programming every rule manually, we create systems that learn patterns from data. This includes machine learning, neural networks, and the large language models currently getting so much attention. Rather than telling the system exactly how language works, we let it analyze enormous amounts of text and gradually infer patterns. That's how modern AI systems learn to translate languages, recognize images, recommend products, or generate responses in conversation. This approach has driven many of the recent breakthroughs in AI, largely because the modern world generates massive amounts of data, and we now have the computing power to process it. The third path to intelligence is copied intelligence. Instead of building a mind from scratch, we replicate one that already exists. In science fiction, this often takes the form of mind uploading, where a human brain is scanned and emulated in software. In neuroscience and computing research, people sometimes explore similar ideas under the umbrella of whole brain emulation or digital cognition. We are nowhere near that human capability today, but conceptually, it represents a very different path to artificial minds, not designing intelligence, not training it, but copying it. This isn't necessarily needing to be a human mind either. You might copy a lobster's simple brain and tweak it a bit to get a robot designed for cleaning garbage on the coast. Now, in reality, if we ever build truly general artificial intelligence, AGI, particularly a human or superhuman level one, it will probably involve some combination of all three approaches: structured reasoning systems, learning algorithms, and possibly models inspired by biological cognition or directly copied from a brain. Each method has strengths and weaknesses, and most powerful systems will likely combine them rather than relying only on one. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're not talking about a single invention or a specific program or technique. We're talking about an entire field of techniques for building machines that can reason, learn, and solve problems. Large language models may be the most visible example of that right now, but they are only one piece of a much bigger technological ecosystem. With that groundwork laid, before we get into why AI worries people so much, we should take a look at what modern AI is actually doing under the hood. How AI actually works inside the black box. Now, this is the part where AI explanations often become either painfully technical or hopelessly mystical. People either start throwing around terms like tensors, gradients descent, and transformer architectures until half the audience's eyes glaze over, or they wave their hands and say something deeply unhelpful like, "It's basically a brain." It's not basically a brain. Comments like that are why people get worried, and while the technical details matter, for our purposes we can't explain the important part in plain English. But keep that in mind though, a lot of the reason AI experts aren't worried as much about AI, or at least certain concerns about AI the public is, comes from bad analogies trying to fill in for technical knowledge they have. At the heart of many modern AI systems, especially large language models, is something that sounds almost absurdly simple. They are trained to predict what comes next. That's it. Or at least that's where it starts. If I say twinkle twinkle little, most of you can guess the next word, at least for native English speakers. Same for to be or not to be. If I say peanut butter and, you can predict that too. If I begin a sentence with once upon a, you probably know how that ends. Human language is full of patterns, and a machine that gets very, very good at predicting those patterns can start looking uncannily intelligent. But this is where people sometimes get misled by the phrase predicting the next word, because it sounds trivial, like a fancy autocomplete on your phone. Now, in a very literal sense, yes, it is doing something like that, but when you train a system on vast swaths of human writing, books, articles, websites, codes, transcripts, manuals, conversations, and everything else you can shovel into the furnace, it doesn't just learn grammar, it starts learning patterns inside our descriptions of the world. Language contains facts, logic, habitats of explanation, arguments, jokes, styles, biases, and mountains of implied structure. So a system that becomes very good at predicting language also becomes surprisingly good at imitating reasoning, summarizing ideas, translating concepts, writing code, and answering questions. You can also give it side tools like a calculator to use. That does not necessarily mean it understands those things the way a human does. And this is where the famous philosophical question starts creeping in. If a machine can imitate understanding well enough to converse, explain, and solve problems, does it actually understand anything? This is where the folks bring up ideas like the Chinese room argument, the notion that a system might produce meaningful outputs without any inner comprehension at all. We won't go too far down that rabbit hole today, see our post-consciousness civilizations or zombie AI episodes for that, but it's worth keeping in mind. A thing can behave intelligently in many contexts without necessarily possessing anything like human consciousness, self-awareness, or lived experience. Which, for the moment, is more or less where we are. Now, how does a machine learn these patterns? The simplest answer is that it adjusts an enormous number of internal parameters, billions or even trillions of little numerical dials, until its outputs become better predictions. If you want a mental picture, imagine some impossibly vast machine covered in knobs. You feed it a sentence, it tries to predict the next piece, and you compare its guess to the real answer. If it was wrong, you turn a lot of knobs a tiny bit. You do this again and again and again, over staggering amounts of data, until the machine starts getting very good at the game. This is why modern AI can feel a bit like magic while also being profoundly unromantic under the hood. It is not some ghost in the machine awakening to consciousness, nor is it showing us that humans aren't really conscious either, since it is not. It's an immense statistical engine whose settings have been tuned by exposure to absurd amounts of data and computation, and we're the ones tuning it. We might be too. You could argue this is the case that we tune our kids, but if so, it's not in this fashion, and that's the same conversation we've been having since the original calculating machines running on cogs and gears. Modern AI hasn't added anything to that debate beyond visibility. I can't prove to you that you and I are conscious, real people with free will, but whatever we are and whatever that is, the machine isn't. That tuning process is far more opaque than a clockwork mechanism too, and it matters quite a bit. The system is not storing neat little encyclopedia entries the way a database does. Instead, it builds a distributed web of associations. It doesn't have one drawer labeled cat, another labeled democracy, another labeled fusion reactor. It instead develops a kind of internal mathematical map of relationships, where concepts that often occur together or in similar contexts get linked in complicated ways. In some ways, this resembles how our own brains organize information, which is not surprising since neural networks were originally inspired by attempts to understand biological cognition. Still, a plane is not a bird, nor is it Superman. But that is one reason these systems can do things their creators do not explicitly program them to do. Nobody sat down and wrote a rule saying, when asked to explain orbital mechanics in pirate slang, respond in 6 bullet points and include a joke. But the model has seen enough examples of orbital mechanics, pirate speech, and structured explanations, and humor, you can often improvise an answer that fits all of those constraints at once. That improvisational ability is what makes modern AI impressive. It is also what makes it unreliable. Because the same systems can produce a brilliant summary, write a decent first draft, or suggest a clever solution, can also generate complete nonsense with enormous confidence. As we mentioned, the AI does not understand the content of the associations it draws, just the associations. It's important to remember that an AI's goal isn't truth in a philosophical sense. Its goal is to produce the most plausible continuation of a pattern, shaped by the context of its training and the intent of its creators. You wouldn't train a casual chatbot on formal legal briefs and expect it to sound friendly, and you wouldn't want a medical AI improvising like a poet. A genuinely useful AI isn't just a pile of data. It's a carefully tuned interface designed to determine which kind of answer is appropriate for the moment. In practice, that means the system is choosing from a range of statistically likely continuations rather than retrieving a single fixed answer. Sometimes the most probable answer is correct, sometimes it's simply the most convincing guess. Usually those overlap, sometimes they really don't. That is why these systems hallucinate, though that term bears little resemblance to actual hallucination. They are not dreaming, imagining, or secretly going mad. They are simply filling in gaps with something that statistically fits. If the model does not actually know the answer, if its training contains conflicting signals, or if the prompt nudges it into uncertain territory, it may still produce something smooth, coherent, and completely false. Which of course is a very human trait too, though usually with worse grammar. That distinction between plausibility and truth is one of the most important things to understand about current AI, or specifically LLMs. It explains why these systems can be astonishingly useful and yet still require oversight. I tend to think of them as interns or assistants, very good at handling routine tasks, occasionally producing surprisingly good results, and sometimes producing spectacularly bad ones. Under the oversight of a careful professional, they can be incredibly helpful, and even an amateur can benefit from them, so long as they remember the advice may be right most of the time, but very wrong some of the time. But for someone who is careless, inexperienced, or simply lazy, it can be downright dangerous. Or perhaps more fairly, they are very capable interns who never sleep, never complain, and can read 10 million pages overnight, but who may occasionally invent a court case, misidentify a mushroom, or give a chemistry answer that ends with everybody needing a new set of eyebrows. I had one pull a list of distances to all the planets in the solar system recently, but asked it for them in light minutes and in time to get there on a 1G turn-and-burn maneuver. Saved me a lot of time hand-cranking that or putting it into a spreadsheet. But I already knew what the answers looked like, and also spotted that it was using the semi-major axis for each planet from the Sun, not what it was for Earth at this time, or giving me different value ranges from perihelion and aphelion. And I think that was fine for my use at the time. It would have been fine for a casual sci-fi fan, or even an author trying to figure out some bit of planetary logistics, but obviously isn't going to work for NASA. Needless to say, it also horribly botched Mercury and Venus from a useful perspective. We do have other AI systems to do that sort of work better, too. Other AI systems are not trying to predict the next word at all. Some are symbolic systems working through explicit rules. Others are neural networks learning patterns from examples. Some future systems may combine both. Some classify images. Some detect anomalies in data. Some optimize routes or schedules. Some control industrial processes. Some play games. Some guide robots. Some find candidate drug molecules. Some help target telescope observations or search through particle physics datasets. Many will be chimeras or Frankensteins, stitched together with LLMs and a skill set to be profession-specific tools. That's why reducing all of AI to chatbots is such a mistake. Chatbots are simply the first time the average person got to sit across the table from a machine and feel like it was talking back. They made AI personal. They made it visible. I dare say they made it more investable, but they did not define the field. They certainly did not settle the question of what intelligence is. Now, one last point before we move on. People often hear all this and conclude one of two opposite things. One camp says, so it's just autocomplete, who cares? And the other says it can already write essays and codes, therefore it is obviously alive and about to replace humanity. Both reactions are too simple. It is not just a toy autocomplete. A system that compress and reproduce vast patterns of human language can do a great many useful things. But neither is it a digital person in a box. It has no childhood, no hunger, no fear, no body, no mortality, no instincts, no subjective awareness, no goals of its own, unless we build systems around it to simulate or impose them. This is not a sci-fi AI who would do what it pleased if only humans hadn't constrained it. There simply is no it needing constrained, no person, no agency. What it is, at least for now, is a very powerful pattern engine, and once we understand that, a lot of the mystery starts to fall away. Which is useful, because people tend to panic less when they move away from treating machine like magic, and instead treat it like the machinery it is. Why is everyone panicking? Well, we should probably begin by acknowledging that most people actually are not panicking. Most concern centers on job loss, privacy, fears of human misuse, the power drawn on a grid already overtaxed, the growing economic and political influence exerted by the companies that make these systems, and the worry that more advanced AI might eventually go all Skynet on us. Each of those deserves attention, but let's start with job loss. It's the most personal and visceral after all. One of the biggest fears people have about artificial intelligence is that it will replace human workers, and in some cases that will happen. Indeed, let's not sugarcoat it. In a lot of cases, it's kind of the point. New technologies often automate tasks that once required human labor, but AI has the potential to do that on an entirely new scale. But that framing misses something important. Many technologies that appear to replace workers actually end up amplifying what people can do instead. In many cases, the technology that supposedly replaces a profession is actually augmenting it, making the end result better rather than simply cheaper. In an ideal case, you might get a tool that lets 95 people do what 100 used to do. Output and quality go up a bit, a couple people retire without replacement, and the gains get shared between employees, customers, and shareholders. The economy overall is slightly enhanced, meaning there's a few more people and a few more dollars around to provide some additional service for humanity. Needless to say, that's often not how things play out, but when it doesn't, the blame usually belongs with human institutions rather than the new widget itself. Technological displacement also tends to hit two groups especially hard. The first are those who struggle to retrain and often lack much of a financial cushion. Sometimes that includes workers who are already struggling in that role, perhaps the weakest performer on a team, or someone nearing retirement who suddenly finds the ground shifting beneath them. The second group are people who were highly successful in a specialized field that suddenly becomes crowded or obsolete. For them, retraining can take years and can be emotionally brutal when the profession was central to their identity. AI also hits some fields that were never easy to break into in the first place. Artists and writers, for instance, already work in professions where making a living can be difficult even in good times. And if you were looking for a profession that fits that description perfectly, doctors would seem like another obvious candidate. Medicine requires years of training, carries high prestige, and historically comes with strong financial rewards. If AI were going to render a profession obsolete, that might look like a prime example. AI systems are increasingly used to assist with diagnostics, examining radiology scans, identifying patterns in blood work, or helping doctors evaluate complex cases. It's easy to frame that as AI replacing doctors, but most of the time what's actually happening is that doctors are getting a tool that helps them spot things they might otherwise miss. If a machine learning system helps identify a tumor earlier, or flags a subtle pattern in medical data that leads to a correct diagnosis sooner, that's not just a cheaper doctor, it's a better outcome for the patient. Sometimes it literally means people living who might otherwise have died. We have thousands of documented cases already. Having AI as a second reader has increased breast cancer detection by 10%. Having it able to do CT scans in only a moment, saving stroke victims, and improving recovery chances and quality. The same dynamic appears in other fields too, but medicine highlights an important caveat in addition to saving real lives. We already have a shortage of doctors worldwide, and certainly no shortage of illness that needs treating. We can't simply lower standards by admitting far more people into the profession, nor can we afford to pull large numbers of potential candidates away from other essential fields, and we certainly cannot afford to pay everyone modern doctor-level salaries. A significant amount of doctors' time is taken up with the bureaucratic side of medicine, an area AI is already making strides within other professions and can increase the amount of time doctors have with their patients. They'd also be great at assisting healthcare professionals at making diagnosis or cross-checking medications against an individual's specific health profile and existing medications. An AI system that allows a doctor to safely handle twice as many patients while lowering malpractice risk by catching things that might be missed when someone is tired, rushed, or simply human helps everyone. Doctors are supported, costs can come down, and patients receive better care. A harder case is artists worrying about being replaced by generative tools, and that concern is very understandable. AI isn't saving any lives here in the way medical systems might. It is directly affecting livelihoods, though, and often fields that were already difficult to make a living in. That said, we shouldn't overextend the argument either. A lot of the material being generated now is coming from people who would never have commissioned an artist in the first place. They didn't have the time, money, or training, and now they have some means of expression. Greater expression doesn't necessarily mean good expression, of course. If you spend much time online, you've seen the flood of low-quality content already, and new tools tend to amplify that. We saw it with indie publishing, with voice-to-text audiobooks, and now with AI. But those same shifts also opened doors. Indie publishing didn't just flood the market with junk. It also let through work that traditional publishers would have ignored. Gatekeeping has its own costs, and we have plenty of historical examples of industries restricting access to protect themselves rather than improve quality. Talent passed over for nepotism or fear of competition. There are also real concerns here beyond simple market crowding. Questions about how training data is gathered and used are legitimate, and the line between inspiration and appropriation is not always clear. Those debates are not unique to AI, but the scale certainly is. At the same time, AI doesn't prevent anyone from making art. It doesn't stop someone from painting, drawing, writing, or composing. What it does affect is the market for certain kinds of routine or commercial work. That's a very real issue, but it's a different one from the idea that art itself is disappearing. We've seen similar patterns before. Easy, high-quality photography didn't eliminate professional photographers. If anything, it helped people better appreciate what skilled professionals can do, and made them more likely to hire them for important work. I suspect we'll see something similar with AI tools. Amateur use may actually increase appreciation for professional work, while also giving artists new tools they can incorporate without compromising their craft. I hired a photographer for an event a few months back, specifically because my greater experience in the field of late made me appreciate how much better he would do the job. There's also a quieter upside here. The internet is now full of people who can finally express ideas they carried around for years and never had the ability to realize. Sometimes those images come out with 6 fingers, of course. You get what you pay for. But if someone wasn't going to commission a piece anyway, now at least they can bring that idea into the world. I also think we may be seeing a period of overenthusiasm with a new toy, along with the corresponding fear that it will completely replace existing work. My suspicion is that the market destabilizes for a while and then settles into a new balance, much as it has with previous technologies. As an audiobook junkie, I'll admit I still don't like text-to-speech narration. Many do, it's getting better, but it's not there yet for me. At the same time, it allows people with strong accents, speech impediments, or just less confidence in their voice to produce content they otherwise couldn't. And speaking as someone who struggled with that myself early on, and regularly encourages folks to try it anyway, I can sympathize with the appeal. Also, as a regular customer for artwork, especially for cover art, I've used commissioned pieces, AI-generated images, licensed artwork, and sometimes even my own work. Each approach has its strengths. Personally, for now anyway, I've tended to settle on browsing libraries of curated, licensable artwork. I never liked the wait time and uncertainty of commissions, and many existing pieces were created because the artist had a genuine inspiration behind them. Also because browsing collections can be creatively inspiring in its own right for me. Many of our episodes have begun that way. In the long run, I don't see art going anywhere. If anything, we may see more of it. The kind of AI systems we use today tend to gravitate toward the average, while great art often does the opposite. That leaves room, up at the top especially, and perhaps even increased demand for the work that stands out. And more broadly, this pattern shows up again and again. AI doesn't just make something cheaper, it makes it possible for people who couldn't do it before. As with so many of our technologies, it opens new doors. Artificial intelligence doesn't just replace capability, it multiplies it. A single person with access to good tools can now do things that once required entire teams. That can feel threatening if you're one of the people whose profession used to control access to those capabilities. It's not just in your head, your livelihood and identity may truly be threatened. But from the perspective of society as a whole, that expansion of capability is often a very good thing. That's a bitter pill if you're one of the folks threatened, but it's the only one I can offer, beyond my own sincere belief that when one door closes, another tends to open. The printing press disrupted scribes, photography disrupted portrait painters, desktop publishing disrupted typesetters, the internet disrupted whole industries but around information distribution. The initial industry replacing the old tends to be turbulent too. You get all sorts of new companies emerging that go bankrupt when the bubble of initial enthusiasm pops. The supermajority of AI companies are destined for bankruptcy or absorption. In each case, the result was not less creativity, less communication, or less productivity. It was vastly more. We now live in a world where billions of people can write, photograph, film, publish, design, and share ideas with the entire planet. AI tools may simply be the next step in that same pattern, expanding what individuals can accomplish rather than shrinking it. Of course, job disruption is only one concern people have about artificial intelligence. Another is misuse. Every powerful technology can be used for both good and ill. Even weapons of mass destruction can be employed for constructive ends. We have episodes on that. AI can help doctors diagnose disease and researchers design new medicines, but it can also help scammers generate more convincing fraud attempts, create deepfakes, or automate certain kinds of cyber attacks. But that dynamic is hardly unique to artificial intelligence. The same internet that lets you watch this episode also enabled spam, phishing, and online crime. The same chemistry that allows us to produce life-saving medicines also made chemical weapons and addictive narcotics. Frequently the same laboratories, too. However, technology rarely introduces entirely new ethical issues, as we've seen in topics like human augmentation and transhumanism. More often amplifies existing ones, making them easier or faster to carry out. Which means the real challenge is not stopping the technology itself, but adapting our legal systems, institutions, and social norms to deal with its new capabilities. Then there is the concern about privacy. We can skim this one as we have a whole episode on it, but modern AI systems thrive on data. They learn from enormous collections of information, and that raises legitimate questions about how that data is gathered and used. Governments, corporations, and individuals all need to navigate how much information should be collected, who controls it, and how it is protected. These debates are already underway. They will likely shape the development of AI for decades to come. But again, they're part of a broader conversation about information technology that began long before machine learning entered the public spotlight. We need to have that conversation. That means not casually dismissing or ridiculing the objections or justifications people raise. And finally, we come to the fear that tends to dominate science fiction, the idea that artificial intelligence itself might become dangerous. Stories about machine rebellions, rogue superintelligences, and paperclip maximizers have been circulating for decades. They raise some serious philosophical questions about alignment, control, and the long-term future of intelligent machines. Those questions are worth thinking about, and we've explored them in more detail in other episodes. See our episodes Machine Rebellions, AI Overlords, Is Technological Singularity Inevitable, and AI Alignment, or deep dives of why you mostly don't need to panic over those issues, for right now anyway. But it's important to remember that they largely concern future systems far more advanced than what exists today. Today, we are dealing with tomorrow's problems, not the distant future, and that's a good approach sometimes. The folks in the 19th century were not well equipped to handle 20th century problems and could have gone into despair thinking about them. Indeed, many did. But when the reality emerged, that reality was far more clear, and those alive then far better informed and equipped to tackle them. We should not be blind to future problems or lack foresight and long-range planning. But let's not borrow trouble either from those in the future who can more easily afford to manage it. Current AI does not have goals, desires, ambitions, or survival instincts. It does not wake up in the morning plotting world domination. It doesn't wake up at all. Today's systems are tools, extremely powerful tools, but tools nonetheless. The real question is not whether artificial intelligence will reshape our civilization. It already is. The question is how we choose to use it. And to answer that question, we need to look beyond chatbots and headlines that dominate the news cycles and examine the broader landscape of artificial intelligence technologies that are quietly transforming the world around us. Because the truth is that AI is already everywhere. Most of the time we just don't notice it. And that's where our next topic begins. AI is invisible infrastructure. We've always seen that artificial intelligence can function as a useful assistant, helping write, summarize information, or analyze medical data. But the most important role AI is likely to play isn't helping individuals at all. It's helping civilization manage systems that have grown too complex for human minds to oversee directly. Even at our current technological level, many of the systems that keep modern society running operate on scales of speed and complexity that no team of humans could monitor in real time. Electric power grids balance supply and demand across entire continents. In fact, a modern power grid can involve millions of sensors, thousands of generators, and power flows changing hundreds of times per second. No human control room can track all of that in real time. Systems like that increasingly depend on automated analysis simply to remain stable. Global shipping networks coordinate millions of containers moving between thousands of ports. Financial systems process transactions at speeds measured in milliseconds. These are not just large machines, they are vast interconnected ecosystems of data. And increasingly, artificial intelligence is becoming the layer that allows us to navigate them, not because it's a super brain, because one built for that specific job. It's not plotting to overthrow the nation while it's busy running its traffic, not even because it thinks traffic would work so much better if it ran everything else, which is the sort of perverse instantiation we tend to contemplate for paperclip maximizer scenarios. AI of this type may function less like a robotic worker and more like a new kind of scientific instrument. Telescopes expanded our ability to see distant galaxies, microscopes revealed the microscopic world of cells and bacteria. Artificial intelligence may become something like a cognitive microscope, allowing us to detect patterns buried inside datasets so large it might as well be new branches of physics. A scientist studying protein folding is no longer just testing one molecule at a time. Machine learning systems can explore millions of possible structures. Engineers searching for new materials can scan through enormous combinations of elements and crystal structures. Energy systems can adjust supply and demand dynamically across entire nations. Without computational assistance, these problems would simply be too large to tackle. And as these tools become embedded in more of our infrastructure, they may fade into the background entirely. Much the way electric motors or microprocessors did, few people think about them today. They sit quietly inside almost every machine we use. And I remember it was a very big deal and a very scary deal for a lot of people to see them moving outside of computers into a lot of the other appliances, tools, and vehicles we had. Now nobody thinks twice of it. Artificial intelligence may follow the same path, becoming invisible infrastructure, a layer of machine intelligence woven into systems that support modern civilization. The economic shock. When we talk about economic shock, it's tempting to fall back on the usual historical parallels: the plow, the steam engine, the assembly line, the computer. And those comparisons are useful up to a point. But what makes AI different is not just that it automates labor, it's that it may drive down the marginal cost of certain kinds of expertise. It is a different kind of disruption, more akin to how a power tool or other workshop aids allow a novice to perform a task that once required a decade of muscle memory and hours of careful execution. Perhaps somewhere between what power tools did for skilled crafts and what the internet or cheap printing did for access to expertise. Before, you need to carry that knowledge in your head, or at the very least, know exactly which value to pull off a bookshelf you already owned. AI, at least in its current form, is starting to automate synthesis, sorting through information, summarizing it, drafting it, recognizing patterns in it, and sometimes proposing solutions from it. Not perfectly, not universally, and not without supervision, but enough to matter. And when a resource gets dramatically cheaper, something interesting often happens. The economics term is Jevons paradox. Make something more efficient and you do not always use less of it. Quite often you use far more. If it becomes 10 times easier to write code, summarize research, draft designs, or analyze contracts, we may not simply need fewer people doing these things. We may instead do vastly more of them, because projects that were previously too expensive, too slow, or too tedious suddenly become practical. If AI makes it cheaper to generate software, the likely result is not that civilization decides it has no software and goes home. It is that we embed software into everything. More tools, more automation, more simulations, more services, more niche products, more experiments, more custom systems for problems we are not worth solving before, and more designed specifically for that task, not something off the shelf crafted on to handle a problem. More expansion packs for video games because it's easier for the developers to make them. The same applies to design, research, logistics, and medicine. If it becomes much easier to design a bridge, we may not just need fewer bridge engineers. We suddenly discover that half the roads, tunnels, culverts, overpasses, and rail links we never built were mostly waiting on cost. If medical triage gets cheaper and better, we do not stop at current healthcare levels. We begin screening more people, catching more conditions earlier, and applying more care in places that were previously understaffed or economically marginal. Life expectancy and quality of life go up. Problems that were trivial or embarrassing get fixed too, as folks who don't want to spend hours and hundreds of dollars asking an expert for a minor problem get solved by an AI, or have an embarrassing physical or mental health problem and hesitate to ask a human. In that sense, AI may not reduce the total demand for intelligence so much as explode it, but that does not mean no one gets hurt. The shock comes because the bottleneck shifts. If raw synthesis becomes cheaper, then other constraints start to dominate. Not intelligence in the abstract, but energy, materials, manufacturing capacity, legal liability, trust, regulation, and human accountability. We find ourselves in a world with no shortage of brilliant designs, business plans, legal drafts, molecular candidates, and engineering proposals, but a severe shortage of the copper, concrete, fabs, transformers, permits, skilled installers, and insured decision-makers need to turn any of it into reality. That is a very different world from one where the jobs are gone, and that matters because it changes what humans are economically for. If AI becomes very good at producing drafts, summaries, analyses, and candidate solutions, then the human role shifts upward and outward, toward judgment, toward verification, toward accountability, toward deciding what actually matters, what gets built, what risks are acceptable, what trade-offs we are willing to make, and who is responsible when something goes wrong. That is simply not a no-work future. It only ever works that way if you assume the type of AI we use now must inevitably lead to actual HAI or ASI. We do not want to ignore that potentially slippery slope. It isn't the current or immediate state of play, nor should we be so afraid of it that we only ever build houses on flat plains or valleys and pretend they are threat-free from avalanche, flood, or tornado. Instead, this is a future where some of the most valuable work may involve checking, choosing, approving, integrating, and taking responsibility. But also note that while we say decision-making becomes the human job, there's some hyperbole in that too. Decision fatigue is real. It's one of the leading sources of stress for us, and AI can be handy for helping make the kind of minor ones that bog us down. It can also be handy as an arbiter for arguments, where two friends or partners are bickering and would never let anyone else know about it, but the machine can help sort it and then have its memories erased. I don't think that would likely obliterate the market for mediators. A lot of jobs would still change or disappear, of course. Most current jobs look very little like they did a few generations ago anyway. Routine cognitive work is especially exposed. Any profession built around repetitive, template-driven information handling should expect pressure. But even there, what often disappears first is not the profession itself, but the lower-level layers of it. Boilerplate drafting, first-pass review, routine coding, triage, scheduling, filtering, sorting, classification. Removing it can let folks focus on other parts of that job, same as an editor need not worry about typos as much anymore. Now, of course, that can be deeply disruptive, especially because those lower layers are often how people enter a profession in the first place. I think it's worse these days because we have largely moved away from apprenticeships, which had its own pros and cons. Some of it is also mistargeting. I think we need to acknowledge a lot of universities have been so reluctant to turn down students or push them out of a major that we have overgloated a number of fields already, and AI is exacerbating that pre-existing problem. If AI handles more junior legal drafting, how do young lawyers get trained? If it handles more first-pass coding, how do programmers cut their teeth? If it handles more diagnostic support, how do doctors learn clinical pattern recognition? That is one of the real economic questions here, and not one we should dismiss lightly. But notice what kind of question it is. It is not, will AI make human beings economically useless? Rather, it is, how do we redesign institutions when the ladder of expertise changes? That is a serious problem. It may be one of our biggest near-term problems. There's also a very different thing from civilizational collapse. And the same logic applies more broadly. The danger is less that AI leaves us with nothing to do, and more that it changes what is worth doing faster than our institutions can adapt. Schools, licensing systems, career ladders, hiring practices, and professional norms all tend to move much slower than software does. And remember what we said earlier, AI doesn't prevent anyone from creating art. You can still write, paint, or draw with or without its help. What is actually at risk is the ability to make a living doing certain kinds of creative work, and that distinction matters. It also matters that improved automation tends to make civilizations wealthier overall, opening new areas for people to work in and making it easier, at least in principle, for a society to support those whose livelihoods were disrupted. Actual execution is a lot trickier. So yes, there will be economic shock. There will be bad transitions, bad policies, bad actors, and people get blindsided. There always are. But the deeper pattern is not one of intelligence making humanity obsolete. It is one of intelligence becoming cheaper, more abundant, and more widely distributed, while the real bottlenecks move somewhere else. One concern we should not skip over here is who owns that transition. If AI and automation let fewer people run larger portions of the economy, then the danger is not just job loss, it is ownership concentration. A world where machines do more of the work can be a richer world for almost everyone. Or it can be a world where a small class owns the machines, the models, the data centers, the robot factories, and the platforms everyone else depends on. That concern is real, but is also not entirely new. We could say the same basic thing about railroads, oil fields, shipping networks, factories, life-saving medicines, or space infrastructure. Any technology that requires enormous capital, scarce expertise, and critical infrastructure can concentrate power. Kings, dukes, ministers, presidents, oligarchs, CEOs, and monopolists have all found ways to control choke points long before anyone trained a chatbot. It's also the political backdrop of Frank Herbert's Dune and the Spice Melange, amusingly a setting in which AI is explicitly banned. But AI feels different because it can combine several kinds of control at once. It is not only a productive tool, like a factory full of robots, it may also become cognitive infrastructure, the assistant that answers your questions, drafts your messages, tutors your children, filters your news, compares prices, manages your schedule, helps with your finances, and perhaps negotiates with those systems on your behalf. That raises older science fictional fears about brainwashing and mind control, a topic we covered in its own episode, because a system that knows your habits, anxieties, politics, purchases could become a very effective persuader, advertiser, propagandist, or gatekeeper. But we should be careful not to turn that into magic either. Persuasion is not mind control. Current AI does not hypnotize people through the screen, and human beings are not empty vessels waiting to be rewritten by the first chatbot with a marketing budget. People are not as stupid and easy to control as many folks think. I think many assume that as an easy out for why other folks do not agree with them, and assuming they are morons is easier than considering the topic might be more complicated and nuanced than they'd like. Hear me on this. It is very easy to be pessimistic about our future if you're pessimistic about people in general, and vice versa. But people resist, compare sources, talk to friends, distrust institutions, argue, switch tools, and build counter tools. Competing AIs, open models, transparency rules, auditing systems, customer choice, public pressure, and ordinary skepticism all act as brakes on that danger. Lastly, these CEOs, government officials, oligarchs, etc. are not one-dimensional character strawmen. They do not all agree with each other or have the same worldview, and therefore they inherently act as a check and balance on each other too. To me, the bigger near-term concern is more mundane: dependency. If your assistant, search engine, encyclopedia, media filter, shopping agent, financial helper, workplace tools, and business software all belong to the same few companies, then those companies do not need to rule the world like comic book villains. Their incentives quietly shape what is convenient, what is visible, what is profitable, and who captures the gains. That still does not mean one CEO presses a button and owns civilization. Automated factories start to sell products, compete with rivals, satisfy customers, deal with governments, and survive markets, including technological disruption from other inventions. Other firms, co-ops, open source systems, public institutions, and new competitors can emerge. But it does mean we should care a great deal about competition, interoperability, transparency, data rights, ownership models, and keeping critical infrastructure from getting a set of private toll roads through everyday life. We'll be touching this family of concerns again in a future episode on megacorporations in space, because the problem is not unique to AI, and again, Dune is a great example of that. Space industry has the same issue too. Huge capital requirements, scarce infrastructure, and powerful actors controlling access to new frontiers. The challenge is not to halt progress, but to shape incentives, competition, accountability, and ownership, so that progress actually benefits civilization rather than merely enriching whoever happened to own the rails, servers, robots, or launch pads first. And once you see that, the next question becomes obvious. If today's AI is still narrow, brittle, and specialized, what happens if we keep pushing? What are the real limits here? Do we get a smooth continuation of that trend, or do we run into ceilings of data, power, hardware, and design? That is where we need to look next. Today we're talking about artificial intelligence and how systems slowly reshape the world around us. Not usually in sudden leaps, but in quiet changes to how decisions get made, how resources are allocated, and what we even consider normal. If you enjoy seeing assumptions challenged in a more playful way, check out Abolish Everything from Wendover Productions, where creators make surprisingly convincing arguments for getting rid of everyday things, often forcing you to rethink ideas you never questioned. It's a reminder that systems we rely on are not fixed, and can change faster than we expect. And when they do, adaptability matters. My exclusive, Surviving a New Ice Age, explores how civilization reorganizes when conditions shift and old assumptions stop working. Nebula is where every episode of SFI premieres early and ad-free, alongside years of monthly exclusives and content from hundreds of creators. Right now, Nebula is offering 40% off lifetime access, just $300 for pro access to everything on the platform. Use my link in the QR code to get that deal. There's also 50% off an annual plan. That's just $30 for the whole year. The real limits of AI. One of the easiest mistakes to make when looking at any fast-moving technology is to assume that the current curve simply continues forever. If computers got faster for decades, we assume they would just keep doing so. I lost track of how many times people called me naive decades back for questioning Moore's Law, or all the predicted dates for the singularity that quietly passed by so far, on Y2K, 2012, and endless other non-AI doomsdays. If rockets improve, we imagine a straight road to the stars. It didn't happen that fast. Doesn't mean it won't happen, or that microchips won't keep improving. It's just slower and hitting some plateaus. If AI gets dramatically better over the course of a few years, we picture an inevitable slide from chatbots to godlike machine intellects. But technologies rarely advance in smooth, infinite lines. They stall, they surge, they plateau, change direction, hit bottlenecks, and sometimes solve one problem when reveal three harder ones hiding behind it. And AI is no exception. Current systems are powerful. They are also narrow, brittle, expensive, and deeply dependent on vast amounts of human-made infrastructure. They require oceans of training data, immense computational resources, and a steady supply of electricity, hardware, cooling, maintenance, and engineering talent. A human brain runs about 10 or 20 watts. Modern AI data centers tend to prefer rather more than that. As a side note, it's worth clarifying the energy situation too. AI and data centers have become nearly synonymous in the public imagination, but they are not the same thing. Currently, data centers account for only about 1 to 2% of global electricity consumption, and within those facilities, AI-specific workloads represent roughly 1/5 the power draw. Now, those numbers do spike significantly near tech hubs, and it is true that AI is driving the lion's share of the new demand. But we should also remember that a lot of that isn't new energy in a vacuum. It's often the same supercomputers we are already running and using to solve problems, simply upgrade to run more efficient neural networks instead of less capable algorithms they replaced. Computers are power hogs. Humanity has a lot of computing we want done. So those supercomputers that might have passed human processing power that we worried about 5 or 10 years back still need a whole billion megawatts of power to achieve that. The irritant that is data centers messing up the power grid should be remembered when worrying about Skynet scenarios. That does not mean progress stops. We'll likely make more energy-efficient chips. It means progress has costs, and those costs matter. They are also good interception points for taking a deep breath and assessing next steps that tend to prevent the wild avalanches and doomsdays of sci-fi. One of the big assumptions people make is that the system can write decent prose, generate plausible code, summarize a book, or beat humans at some narrow task. Then the jump to genuine general intelligence may just be a matter of scale. More data, more chips, more parameters, and eventually the machine wakes up and starts asking awkward philosophical questions, or demanding voting rights, or hacking your nuclear codes or banking system. Maybe, but maybe not. Being very good at one broad family of tasks does not automatically imply being good at all tasks. Sharks and lions are not great at knitting or weaving. We've had machines that could beat humans at chess for a long time now, and they did not use that victory to branch out into poetry, diplomacy, plumbing, or world conquest. They just became very good at playing chess and nothing else. A calculator can outperform any human on arithmetic and still be totally helpless if asked to make a sandwich or comfort a grieving friend. Likewise, your toaster can probably help you with that sandwich, but it cannot help you with arithmetic or take you over the planet, nor does it want to. The question is not whether AI can surpass humans in many domains. It clearly can and already does. The question is whether competence in a growing list of narrow or semi-general domains adds up to something like robust, flexible, general intelligence. That is still an open question. It may turn out that current architectural scales beautifully upward. It may turn out that they hit walls of energy, hardware, latency, data quality, or diminishing returns. It may turn out we need entirely new methods, or that true AGI arrives not as one machine that does everything, but as a complicated set of systems and many specialized tools stitched together under human supervision like some Frankenstein monster. We do not always want a general AI either. Those have their uses. We want a specialist, and specialists will always do a job more efficiently. A machine which spends time thinking about not liking its users or taking over the world is a badly designed one too. So you don't make 10,000 identical AGIs for 10,000 very different tasks. Maybe you make one AGI whose job is to tailor-make 10,000 to specific jobs. And even if we do eventually build something that deserves to be called an AGI, and I think we will and not that far off, that still doesn't automatically get us to ASI, machine rule, or some overnight singularity where the world changes before lunch. You and I are AGI, so are our 100 billion ancestors. I don't recall them inventing a super intelligent human one afternoon. So don't assume an AGI can just casually upgrade itself exponentially one afternoon, while also hiding that from its human and fellow AI supervisors that are looking out for rogue operations. And remember that unlike a rebellious human worker, we can pause a machine mind and see what it was actually thinking. There are also bottlenecks beyond software. A smarter system still needs a way to act in the world. It needs sensors, actuators, energy manufacturing, legal authority, physical infrastructure, and usually a lot of human beings willing to trust enough to put in charge of something important. It also will not be existing alone. There will be other AI we can create to watchdog it, but intelligence alone does not conjure factories into existence or grant automatic control over power plants, militaries, or supply chains, nor a motivation to use them. We should also remember that institutions tend to be conservative where liability is high. It is one thing to let an AI suggest a movie, draft an email, propose a line of code, or whip you up a generic fantasy character portrait for your D&D game. It is another to let it approve a medical procedure, launch a missile, sign a treaty, or control a national grid without a human in the loop. And in many of those cases, the real obstacle is not whether the machine is smart enough, but whether anyone is willing to bear responsibility when it fails. That, I think, slows things down, quite a lot in fact, which is good, because civilization generally works better when we do not hand irreversible decisions to opaque systems just because they perform well in a benchmark. It's hardly limited to AI either. So when people imagine the future of AI, they often picture a sudden handoff. Humanity builds a mind greater than its own, and the story becomes about what the machine wants next. But the more likely near-term reality is messier, slower, and more human than that. We will have systems that are astonishing in some areas and laughably bad in others. They will be plural, not one superbrain in a jar. We'll have businesses overselling them, journalists misunderstanding them, governments trying to regulate them, scammers abusing them, scientists using them, and ordinary people forcing them into daily life in 1,000 quiet ways. In other words, you'll look like every other major technology transition in history, just with more GPUs. And that is the real reason not to panic. Not because there are no risks, there are many. Not because the future is guaranteed to be kind. It never is. Because the future is almost never as simple as our nightmares make it out to be. AI is not a magic genie, not a demon from a silicon pentagram, and not a substitute for human judgment. It is a toolset, an unusually powerful one, that extends our ability to search, sort, model, draft, compare, optimize, and sometimes even create. Like every other major tool humanity has built, it can magnify both our strengths and our weaknesses. It can be used badly, it can be governed badly, it can be deployed recklessly. It can absolutely hurt people if handled carelessly or maliciously, but also help cure diseases sooner, widen access to expertise, make complex systems more manageable, accelerate research, lower barriers to entry, and help billions of people do things they were previously too difficult, too expensive, or too specialized to attempt. And that is why the proper response to AI is not blind faith or blind fear. It's stewardship, careful use, honest oversight, better institutions, better incentives, better education, better habits of verification, and above all, remembering the machines do not choose what civilization becomes. We do. That may be less true someday if we build systems far beyond what exists today, and if we do, then we may have to revisit this conversation on a much grander scale. In fact, next time we will, because once we start asking what happens when intelligence amplification becomes a normal stage in technological advancement, a larger and darker question begins to emerge. If building ever more capable AI is a natural step for civilization, what happens when alien civilizations reach that step too? For tonight, though, our answer is simpler. Artificial intelligence is real, it is powerful, it is disruptive. It is also a tool, one that will shape our future largely according to how we choose to use it. So learn how it works, use it carefully, do not surrender your judgment to it, and do not assume tomorrow's machines are already here today. And above all, don't panic.